I played A Lethal Company for the first time about 2 months ago, and I instantly fell in love with the game. Since then, I've gotten over 100 hours of gameplay, and I've dedicated myself to getting better and learning as much as I possibly can about the game and how it works. I wanted to make a video sharing this information with everyone, and I had the idea of doing a comprehensive video compiling a bunch of tier lists for all of the different things in the game, ranked by their merits using objective information along with my own personal gameplay experience. So I'm going to be explaining the reason for every placement as I go along, so it should be both entertaining and educational for people who want to get better at the game. And without further ado, let's get right into the first list. Before I start the rest of the video, I have a really important announcement to make. As thanks for 200,000 subscribers, I've collaborated with Onage to bring you all an official Minaxa plushie. You can do so many things with him, like edit a video, play some music, hang out with the pets, and you can even microwave him. The campaign will be live for 2 weeks starting today, and after that they'll be gone forever. If you want one of these bad boys, head on down to the description or pinned comment, pre-order one right now, and grab yourself your very own Minaxa plushie. Okay, here we are. We're gonna be starting off with the entity tier list. Before I go into it, it's important to understand certain mechanics that a lot of people might not be acutely aware of. So every moon has a power level. It's essentially a cap on how many things can be active at any given time. And this applies for both indoor and outdoor enemies. Those are two separate power levels that the game considers. And there's also a maximum spawn count for every enemy in the game. And if you were to, for instance, kill an enemy with a maximum spawn count of 1, not only would you free up the power level that they were previously taking up, but another one would not be able to spawn because on that given day, their max spawn count is 1. So those are some pretty important considerations to make. I'm gonna go ahead and cover things in the wiki order, starting with the Snare Flea. So the Snare Flea has a power level of 1 and up to 4 max spawn. It's really not that bad of a thing to deal with, but it can catch you off guard, even if you're a good player. But realistically, if you were constantly scanning and just have a basic level of spatial awareness, you probably will not die. If you do not have a shovel on hand, or you do not have a friend nearby with a shovel, you are probably just going to die unless you can find an exit, because if you exit the building while they're on you, they die. So, all things considered, I think it's a B tier enemy, in my opinion. I don't think it's definitely not an A tier threat. Moving on to the bunker spider. So I have some interesting opinions about the bunker spider. On rare occasions, it can spawn in your way, but that's pretty rare. In most instances, you can kind of just ignore them. They're quite chill. The reason why I am not going to rank them very high is because they have a power level of 3, which is really high for something that realistically does not pose much of a threat. I honestly think it makes no sense. They also have a max count of 1, so if you kill one, which you can do within reason, if you are decent at the game and can back up with a shovel without messing up in an open area, you will basically just not have to deal with even the thought of a spider for the rest of the round. With all that being said, I think I'm going to put it in C tier, because it's really not. It's a pretty negligible threat. And in those instances, they're just kind of going to be a free 3 power level being taken up, so other things can't spawn in its place, which is why I think it's actually something you kind of want around, in my opinion. Okay, so moving on, we have the hoarding bug. Everyone knows the hoarding bug. I'm just going to stick it in D tier. It's not really like, it can end up kind of messing with you, but it's not really a huge deal. It has a power level of 1, up to 8 of them can spawn, but I've never seen more than maybe 2 or 3 on a map. They only take like 2 shovel hits to kill, if I remember correctly. I think it used to be 3 and now it's 2. Either that or it's still 3. They're very, very easy to deal with. Even if you're being chased and you can't attack them, you can evade them quite easily. But aside from that, yeah, not really a threat at all. So we're gonna stick them down here. Next, we have the Bracken. This is our first hard hitter. I do not like the Bracken at all. His AI literally knows where every player at every given time is, and it's designed to sneak up in your blind spot and be completely silent and then kill you instantly with no warning. This can catch even the best players off guard. It is really not to be underestimated, in my opinion. At this point, I've conditioned myself to look behind me quite frequently, and even then, sometimes it's not enough. It's also pretty difficult to kill without a shotgun, though it is possible, and it's not even that unreasonable, but it's pretty hard. That's something I would reserve for the best players only. If you do have a shotgun though, now you kind of want them to show up, because if it shows up and you have a shotgun and you kill it, which is quite easy, it has a max spawn of 1. So now you won't have to deal with the idea of a bracken for the entire day, which is very useful. It has a power level of 3, so when it's around, it takes up quite a bit of the power level, which I think is quite justified. On its own, a lot of the time, it's not a huge deal, but when you have to deal with a bracken along with other threats like coil heads, it becomes a big problem, a big problem. I'm gonna go ahead and put him in A tier. I don't think it's an S tier threat, but it's pretty bad, so I'll put him up there. Next, we have the Thumper. The Thumper is not that bad. It's dangerous, but you can hear him coming from a mile away. He starts thumping around when he spawns, and he has a power level of 3, which honestly, I don't know if I agree with. Maybe 2 would be more appropriate, but 3 is fine. I'm fine with 3. It has a max spawn of 4, which is kind of annoying, but I've never seen more than 2, I don't think. So yeah, I don't know. They're pretty easy to evade around corners. They're quite easy to kill if you have a shotgun or a shovel. If you have any idea how to fight them with a shovel, you definitely won't die while doing it. You can definitely kill them. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in B tier, but it's definitely more of an issue than the Snare Flea is. That's how I feel. So that's where we're gonna place them. Next, we have the slime, the hygrodere, I think is the Latin pronunciation. It's a word that means to make wet or moist, which, you know, kind of makes sense. This is a pretty easy placement of like D tier, but in my opinion, the slime is more likely to screw you over than the hoarding bug is. It's easier to avoid, but if it ends up camping an entrance, that's bad news. That's quite hard to deal with. And the slime can be very inconvenient if you're currently trying to run away from something more dangerous, like a coil head. I've had that happen before, and I just feel like I have more dangerous situations where the slime is involved than I do when the hoarding bug is involved, because the hoarding bugs are generally passive. They're not really a big deal, whereas the slime is always aggressive, albeit it's quite slow. It has a power level of 1, max spawn 2. It's generally a pretty negligible threat. You can trap them behind doors. You can jump over them within reason, but you can't kill them, which is something that the hoarding bug can be killed. But yeah, I'm pretty solid in my placement of them. Next, we have the Ghost Girl. So, Ghost Girl. I do not think the Ghost Girl is that bad. She's really not that bad. She only affects one player at a time. If you know what you're doing, you can stall her progress quite significantly by just not looking at her for as long as reasonably possible. You can also go back to the ship and orient the terminal in such a way where the wall is to your back. And if this happens, since she can only spawn behind you, she won't actually be able to spawn anymore. So she takes up 2 power level. She's a max spawn of 1, obviously. So if you swap with the terminal person after you get haunted, you can kind of just take up 2 power level for free because she is technically active, but she can't spawn. She can't even kill you. So even after she enters her chasing phase, you can avoid her. If you just run away, she'll disappear after a while, and then you'll be safe for a little bit longer. But despite everything that I've said, it is an enemy that is very distressing, and it does force you to change your playstyle quite dramatically. So with that being said, it's definitely at least a B tier problem. But honestly, I've died more to Snare Fleas than I have to Ghost Girls. I think I've died to the Ghost Girl like twice total in my 100 hours. It's really not a big deal. It's just a scary enemy. I'm pretty solid in my placement. I'll put it in B tier. Next, we have the Spore Lizard. This guy is very, very unlikely to hurt you or kill you in any possible way. It's pretty obvious. It's kind of a funny haha enemy. And don't get me wrong, I love this guy. He's adorable, but he's not going to be hurting anybody. There's pretty much nothing to say about them. If you die to them, you're kind of just bad. I don't know how that's even possible. Nutcracker. That's the next one. That's tough. The Nutcracker, for some ungodly reason, only has a power level of 1 and a max spawn of 10. Now, depending on who you ask, that's a good thing, because some people like farming shotguns, which is a good idea because they're worth quite a bit and they're very, good to have. They're pretty dangerous. You can counter them by just kind of standing still. It's just really annoying to play around them because you have to keep your distance in terms of proximity because they can trample you, which will kill you instantly. Otherwise, they can shoot you. If you're caught in the open, they will kill you pretty much guaranteed. They don't miss unless you bait them around corners, because as long as they have initiated it, they are guaranteed to fire that shot. But if you're in the open and can't hide, you're just gonna die. They do make a lot of noise though. Like you will know when they're around. It's kind of like a thumper in that regard, but it's definitely much more dangerous than a thumper. Much more dangerous. Once you get a shotgun, once you kill one, it basically becomes a negligible threat entirely. But either way, with all that being said, I am gonna put it in A tier, but below the Bracken, because I have died to the Bracken far more times than I've died to the Nutcracker, which is probably because the Nutcracker is not quite as common of an enemy. All right, moving on to the Coilhead. We all know that this tier is going to be saved almost exclusively for the Coilhead. They are nuisances. Very, very much so. I really don't think I need to explain why it's the most inconvenient enemy in the game. They force you to change absolutely everything you're doing. If you're playing with multiple people, one of them is basically forced to stop what they're doing and stare so that the other people can continue looting or guide them out of the area. You can stall them behind doors, but it takes about 10 to 15 seconds for them to breach the door anyways, and they cannot be killed. If you are very coordinated and lucky with the seed, you can trap them behind powered doors with good coordination between the terminal person. Everyone always talks about that, but the circumstance in which you can reasonably do that, I feel, is so absurdly rare that it's not even a consideration that I'd like to make. Like, when have you ever realistically had the opportunity to seal a Coilhead behind a powered door? That just kind of doesn't happen. It's only something you can reasonably do on Titan, and even then, it's not likely. So that's not a really good excuse. They are just definitely the most inconvenient enemy in the game. It's not even close, in my opinion. They have a power level of 1, by the way, and a max spawn of 5. So that's pretty bad. I really don't quite understand the reason behind enemies like the Nutcracker and Coilhead being a power level of 1, but I think I kind of get it, because of the total power level on every moon is less than 20 at the max, and usually less than 15. So I think I understand. And moving on from the Coilhead to the Jester. The Jester is almost as bad as the Coilhead, but they're pretty unlikely to kill you. I think the Coilhead is a lot more of an immediate danger, whereas the Jester is kind of a, we have to evacuate everyone right now, but most likely nobody is going to die. Because of the fact that you have to drastically change your playstyle, unless you are doing some crazy radar booster shenanigans, using a terminal person, it's basically just an unstoppable threat. So I'm going to go ahead and put him in S tier, below the Coilhead. I think that's reasonable. They have a power level of 3 and a max spawn of 1. So not that bad to have them just patrolling around, since they're taking up 3 power level, but they tend to find players pretty quickly, so it's kind of difficult, really. All right, moving on to the Masked, or the Mimic, or the Zombie. I've heard a lot of other names. Not sure why people don't just call them the Masked, since that is their name, but they're pretty obnoxious, but they're not really a problem. If you have a shovel or a shotgun, you're probably going to be able to kill them with ease. They're not very good at turning, so if you kind of just do a circle around them while they chase you, you can kill them pretty easily with a shotgun, even if they start running at you. They also only target one person at a time, so if you're playing with multiple people, the other person can start hitting it while it's chasing a different person, and they'll just die. You can hear their footsteps from quite far away after they spawn. It does sound like a player, but if you're playing with multiple people, you can just be like, hey, is that a person? And if you don't get a response, well, it's not a person. And if you're playing alone, then obviously it's not a teammate. The main problem is that they can follow you outside, which is pretty annoying. But I just, there's so many instances in which I've dealt with them. They're quite rare enemies, honestly. Even on the hard moons, they're pretty rare. And even then, I don't generally end up dying to them, but they do force me to kind of evacuate or move away if I don't have a weapon. So while they are inconvenient, they're just so rare and not really a lethal threat. I'm gonna put them down here. It's just not really a big deal, honestly. So now we're moving on to the outside enemies, and the outside power level is completely separate from the indoor power level. The first one we're gonna be talking about is the eyeless dog. Everyone loves the eyeless dog, right? Wrong. They're annoying. Everyone knows that. They're rough. They do force you to change your playstyle. They're kind of annoying when combined with worms and giants, but you can pretty much entirely counter this combo with an exploit called crouch sprinting. If you spam your crouch bind while sprinting, you don't make footsteps, except for the first footstep when you initiate the action, which will not kill you to a dog. They'll just have their attention gotten, and then you can kind of just run away. You can counter them in quite a few ways. The game gives you a lot of options. You can use boom boxes, you can use the loud horn, you can order a walkie-talkie from the dropship, and the music will distract them, which is generally your best option in a lot of instances. And if you're good at the game, you can dodge them when they get angry and start like charging. Not forever. Some people can do it forever. They're kind of clumsy. The bestiary entry even says that. There's also a few exploits that you can use to kill them. They do take like 12 shovel hits, so it's kind of generally not very reasonable to try killing them, but there's a few ways that you can do it. So with all that being said, I think it's a problem. They're definitely a problem. Are they an A tier problem? Are they as bad as brackens and nutcrackers? No, absolutely not. But they're definitely worse than everything else on here. So I'll put it top B. I think that's reasonable. They have a power level of 2 and a max spawn of 8, actually, but a max spawn of 8 would entail taking up quite a bit of the power level. Most moons don't have a power level that high, so the max spawn of 8 is negligible. Now the Forest Keeper, or Forest Giant, everyone just calls it the Giant. 3 power, 3 max spawn. Probably doesn't come as a surprise for me to say that these guys really suck. I really don't like giants. They're practically unkillable, aside from, you know, a lot of people know about the one niche scenario where you can bait a worm while it's chasing you, but they're quite fast, and they're persistent, and they chase you if you don't cut off line of sight. They force you to drop all of your items, and even then, you still might not be able to outrun them over a long distance with no hiding spot. And for most purposes, they can't really be distracted. You kind of just have to shimmy around them. I don't know. You can use stun grenades or the radar booster, which are very useful. They will stun them for a very, very long time, but they also disorient you in the process. And the radar booster requires someone to be on the terminal and be spamming a command. So they're basically, it's -1 player. And if they're spamming a command, they're not really going to be able to help with anything else except for the one person who is using the radar booster, unless it's just outside the ship. But I have some opinions about the radar booster that I will talk about later. One saving grace is that they are quite large and quite loud, so you will be aware that they're around. It's very unlikely that they're gonna spawn without you knowing. I can't really put it in S tier. It's not on the level of jesters and coilheads. Is it more dangerous than a bracken though? Absolutely. I think it's more inconvenient for sure. Then we have the Earth Leviathan, the worm. The power level of 2, max spawn of 3. They're not nearly as bad as you would probably think. The way they work is that they have a big like circle radius around them, and they're kind of just wandering outside. Once they detect you, they'll start chasing you quite slowly. You can outrun them very easily. There's a smaller circle within that bigger radius in which you're actually in danger. And when that smaller radius comes into contact with the player, they'll choose a random, generally quite fast time to start surfacing. That's when you see the particles, and then they'll surface. And if you get caught in that smaller circle, when that happens, you'll die. If you get particularly unlucky, they can surface almost instantly. So really, you have to drop all of your items. You cannot play around with the worm. I mean, you kind of can. They're really not a big deal. You can even bait them on purpose, honestly, to get rid of them. That's a pretty big benefit. They would generally be an issue around dogs, but the crouch sprinting thing I mentioned earlier kind of negates that entirely. But I just don't really believe that they're a big deal. Do I think that they're a bigger deal than the spider? Absolutely. Do I think they're a bigger deal than the ghost girl? Not really. I've definitely died to the worm more times than the ghost girl, but that's because I'm trying to be greedy. If you're not greedy, which means you just drop your items and run away, there's no way that you're gonna die. It's just not gonna happen. The only way you die to them is greed. So I'm gonna put them there. Next, we have the baboon hawk. They have a power level of 1, max spawn of 15 for some reason, but you're never gonna get that many. They're annoying, but not really much of a problem. You just kind of have to not look at them. If you don't look at them, they won't get angry at you. That's how they work. If they're in groups, then they can be a problem. They do chunk damage at you quite quickly, actually. So you just have to either stick together or not look at them or stay far away from them. But if you don't bother them, generally they won't bother you. Trying to kill them is pretty difficult, so I wouldn't recommend that. They can also steal items. It's like an outside hoarding bug, but a bit more dangerous. So that kind of sucks. I'll probably put them like here, because I would consider the slime to be more of an inconvenience than they are. But yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. Okay, next we have the circuit bees. They have a power level of 1, max spawn of 6, though their power level isn't really relevant. I think they take up the daytime enemies. So there's the outdoor nighttime and outdoor daytime and indoor. Those are 3 separate power level considerations. They're not really relevant in terms of that discussion. They are really dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. If you do know what you're doing, the bees should not kill you. They really shouldn't. As long as you and your teammates all know what you're doing around them, you're very unlikely to die. They only do like 10 damage at a time. I'm gonna rank them rather lowly. The main consideration that I'm having with the bees is that you can choose to ignore them if you want to. Most of the time, in like 99% of scenarios, you can just decide, I don't want the risk of trying to take the bees, so I'm not going to. That's not really an option that you get with pretty much every other enemy in the game. So because of that one fact, I think I'm gonna put them down here. It's definitely more of an issue than the masked is, but not more than the spider. It's really just not a big deal, as long as you know what you're doing. Now, if you don't know what you're doing, it's like a fucking A tier threat. So you really gotta just understand that there is a certain strategy that works with them, and you really need to stick to it. Otherwise, you're probably gonna die. Now we're moving on. The last 3 are kind of silly because, well, these 2 can't kill you. It's not possible. The order doesn't even matter. I like the manticoil more, so I'll put them up here. But then we got Jeb, the company monster. This is an enemy that can only kill you if you have explicitly done something wrong, if you have made it upset, or if your teammates have made it upset. It operates on sound, which means the bell or any sound objects or your footsteps or your talking. So if you just don't do any of that, which is not that hard, you won't die. But since it is capable of killing you, and I would say that it's capable of killing you more often than the spore lizard is, it probably would go here. Because the spore lizard is just like not even the most common enemy in the world, and it's just gonna bite you a little bit. If anything, the spore lizard might scare you and make you like fall, but you're more likely to die to this guy than you are to this guy. So I'll put him here. I think that's pretty reasonable. Sometimes it can pop very quickly, the company monster, so that's why I'll put it above the spore lizard.
And one last thing, I know they don't quite fit since they're not entities, but I figured that they were hazards that spawned in similar ways to entities, and I should probably rank them anyways. So the turret and the mine. If you're curious as to where I would place them on this list, the turret would be bottom S tier because I have died to them so many times. They are very dangerous and show up on most maps, so I think that's pretty fair. And the mine I would put between the slime and the baboon hawk, and my logic with that is that the slime is basically a slow moving mine, so because it actively chases you, I would say that it's a bit more dangerous than a mine is. But yeah, I think that's fair.
And with that, we have the finished monster tier list. That's it. Okay, now we are moving on to the scrap tier list. So this was, I think this was the hardest one to put together. because there's so much and there's a lot of nuance for some of them. So for each of these, the considerations that I'm going to be making are their average price, their weight, and whether or not they are two-handed. Starting with the air horn, it has a minimum price of 52, a max of 72, and an average of 62. It weighs nothing at all, and it is not two-handed. So that is basically going to be automatically an S tier item. That is a very, very good item. Apparatus. I like the apparatus because it's always worth 80. So at every stage of the game, this is a very good item to come across. However, it weighs 32 pounds and it's double-handed. I can't really put it anywhere but the B tier because of that. Next, we have the Beehive. This is the first super nuanced entry because the Beehive has an average price of 95 and it weighs nothing. It is double-handed, and obviously, elephant in the room, you have to deal with bees in order to acquire it. So, like I said before, if you know what you're doing with bees, it's not a huge deal, but things can go wrong. They're quite dangerous, but quite expensive. So because of that, the conclusion that I came to while doing this list was to put them at the bottom of S tier. If you know what you're doing, they should essentially be free money. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Big Bolt, not good. Average price of 26, weighs 19 pounds. Pretty bad. Put it like right there. It's a pretty bad item, honestly. The Bottles, average price of 50, weighs 19, and is double-handed. Of the three, these three, the Axle, the Engine, and the Bottles, it is the better one. I can't really put it above C tier, but it's definitely not a D tier item, just because they tend to be pretty expensive. The Brass Bell. So the Brass Bell is a pretty good item, actually. It has an average price of 64, but it weighs 24 pounds. That's not great, but it's definitely at least like a high B tier item just because of the average price. Candy. Candy is really bad. It's a really bad item. It has an average price of 21 and it weighs 11 pounds. It's a really bad item. I don't know. Not much to say about that. Next, we have the Cash Register. This is one of the hardest things to consider where it should be because on the one hand, it's expensive as hell, but on the other hand, it's rare, it's heavy, and it's two-handed. It's not just heavy, it's very heavy. I put it at the top of B tier, personally, because the average price is 120. If you find one of these, you're more likely than not going to be trying to take it back to the ship with you no matter what. So that was a consideration that I made as well. Next, we have the Chemical Jug. It's another really weird one because it has a pretty decent average price of 58. It can go all the way up to 84, actually, but it weighs 32 pounds and it's double-handed, and it only spawns on Vow for some reason. So I placed it at the top of C tier just because it has the potential to be worth a lot, but on average it's 58, which is not that good. Not ideal. The Clown Horn is, I think, statistically identical to the Air Horn, so we're putting it right next to it. Moving on is the Coffee Mug. Coffee Mug is actually pretty good. It has an average price of 46, but it can go up to 68, and it weighs 5 pounds. It's a very light item. I'm gonna put it in S tier, just because it's a very light item that has the potential to be worth as much as like 60 something. So it's a bit of a tough one, but it's going to be pretty much at the bottom of S tier. Not there though. I did say that the B's would stay down there. Next, we have the Comedy Mask. Now, the Comedy Mask is not that good. It has an average price of 40, but the problem is that it weighs 11 pounds for some reason. So I'm going to put it in the B tier, but it's going to be below all of this other stuff that we've had so far. The Tragedy Mask, I'm just going to place it now because the stats are like identical, but it's a bit worse since it has a higher chance of killing you. So I will consider that. And after that, Cookie Mold Pan. Not a fantastic item at all. There's an average price of 26 and weighs 16 pounds. So that's not very good. I'm going to put it like right here. It's unfortunate, but I think that's pretty reasonable. The homemade flashbang. It technically, it does have a functionality. I will give it that. But its average price is 19. It's just not, it's not very good. I'm gonna put it right here. It's just not good at all. Next is the double barrel. So the shotgun, I'm ranking it by its effectiveness as a weapon on the equipment tier list. But on this list, it's still really good. It has a range of 30 through 90, meaning an average price of 60, and it weighs 16 pounds, which is not, that's pretty good, but it's not super, super good. I can't really warrant putting it above the apparatus, because the apparatus is always worth 80. So the dustpan is next. A lot of you might not even be super familiar with this item because it only spawns on experimentation and it's not very good. It has an average price of 22, but it doesn't weigh anything though. And it can be up to 32. So it's like not really good, kind of leaning on bad. But the fact that it weighs nothing is gonna save it from being in the D tier. Realistically, it's definitely below these. Next, we have the egg beater. So it can be worth up to 44, but it can be worth as little as 12, giving it an average price of 28, and it weighs 11 pounds. So it's kind of a bad item. It's just straight up bad. So I'm gonna put it over here as well. I'm not sure if it's better or worse than the dustpan, in all honesty. I think I'm gonna put it below the dustpan, honestly. Next, we have the fancy lamp. Fancy lamp's kind of tough because it's kind of in the same boat with the painting. They're both expensive, but they're also heavy and they're two-handed. The average price of the lamp is 94 and it weighs 21 pounds. But it can be worth as much as 128 or as little as 60. But even 60 is pretty good. Even the lowest possible price of the lamp is quite good. So I'm gonna put it in the A tier for sure. But it's not an S tier item simply because it weighs 21 pounds and it's double-handed. Whereas everything up here is on average much better in terms of price versus weight. Next, we have the flask. This item is quite bad. It can be worth up to 44. It has an average price of 30, but it can also go as little as 16. And it weighs 19 pounds. That's really heavy for a small item that's not worth very much. So I'm gonna put it in here because I'm giving it a little bit of a break from these two, because like if you find a flask in its 30s or 40s, you're probably gonna pick it up. Any lower than that is a bit questionable. It's kind of just, it's rough. It's rough. So next we have the gift box. The gift box is a wonderful item. It's moderately heavy, but as we all know, it gives you a random piece of loot from the moon that you got it from, which can include items that are a lot heavier than 19 pounds or even two-handed. So it's a ridiculous advantage. No other item in the game grants this advantage. And it works best on the moons where the loot pool is generally light and expensive, because you'll end up getting like perfume bottles. And there's a really interesting quirk about the gift box. It tends to give you items that are much more expensive than what you would generally find if you weren't getting them from a gift box. I've seen some items go well over their maximum price when being obtained from a gift box. So this is easily S tier, like above the mug. It's really good. It's a really good item. Okay, next we have the gold bar. I kind of talked about the gold bar earlier. Again, it's pretty arbitrary. I put it at the bottom of A tier because it does weigh a lot, but it's not two-handed like the cash register. And the average price of the gold bar is 156 with a max of 210. That is absurd, but it's rare. It only spawns on March and experimentation, and the spawn chance is ridiculously low. So I really don't have any good means as to rank it relative to other items in the game, but I'm set where I want them to be. The golden cup. The golden cup is quite good actually. It has an average price of 60, but it weighs 16 pounds. I'm gonna put it up here for now. I think that's fine. I think that works. Hairbrush. The hairbrush is like the candy, but it's slightly better. The stats are almost identical. Have you ever found a hairbrush or a candy worth a single digit value. How does that feel? How does it feel to find those items? I imagine it feels quite bad. So I'm going to go ahead and keep them below the flashbang, even though the average price is higher, just because nothing can really beat the feeling of getting a single digit one of these two. That is just, it's terrible. They belong down here. They deserve it. Okay, the next item is the complete opposite of what I was just talking about. It is the hair dryer. I'm going to go ahead and say it. This is the best item in the game. It has an average price of 80 despite weighing 7 pounds. And the lowest possible price is 60. So no matter what, if you find this item, it's going to be worth 60. That is insane. It weighs 7 pounds, but that's essentially a negligible amount of weight. Like, who cares if the item weighs 7 pounds? Definitely the best item, for sure. Okay, next we got the jar of pickles. The pickles are actually kind of good. It's a pretty good item. I put them here. They have an average price of 46, can go all the way up to 60. And they weigh 16 pounds. So they're not the lightest thing in the world, but because their average price is like 46, I give them a little bit of slack. They're at the bottom of A tier. All right, large axle. The large axle is like the bottles, but a little bit worse. That's it. That's all there is to it. It's the bottles, but a bit worse. Then we have the laser pointer. Laser pointer is pretty good. It weighs 0 pounds, can be worth up to 100, can also be worth as little as like 32. So the average price is 66. That's still really good, and it weighs nothing. So it's definitely an S tier item. Definitely above these, because it doesn't weigh anything. Like, you're almost always going to be happy to find this item, unless it is like exactly 30 something at the very, very bottom end of its limit. Next is the Magic 7 Ball. So the Magic 7 Ball, it has an average price of 54 because it has a pretty high variance, 36 through 72, and it weighs 16 pounds. So it's definitely better than the pickles, the same weight, but higher average price. Next is the Magnifying Glass, which is pretty much just the 7 Ball. It has an average price of 52. It does 44 through 60. So although the maximum price is pretty significantly lower, the minimum price is significantly higher. The average ends up being almost identical, but it weighs 5 less pounds for almost the same average price. Okay, Old Phone. Old Phone is an excellent item. It has an average price of 56 from 48 through 64, weighing 5 pounds. Excellent item. I'm gonna put it like right here. Yeah, that's where it goes. The painting. Talked about it earlier a little bit. Kind of hard to place. The painting has an average price of 92. That's pretty good, but it also weighs 32 pounds. And it's still quite large. Covers a lot of your screen when you're carrying it. So does the lamp though. So because of the fact that it's 32 pounds, which is a lot more than, it's almost 10 more than the lamp, I'm gonna put it below. Yeah, the average price is actually a bit lower as well. So yeah, I'll put it exactly where it is. Next, we have the perfume bottle. The perfume bottle is the second best item in the game. The perfume bottle doesn't weigh anything, but the perfume bottle has an average price of 76, not 80. The perfume bottle can go as low as 48 if you get unlucky, whereas the minimum price of the hairdryer is 60, and the maximum price of the perfume bottle is 104, which is only 4 above the maximum price of the hairdryer. So I think that 7 pounds is kind of negligible when comparing them. I think the hairdryer is just better. I could see it either way, honestly. A pill bottle, kind of bad. It has an average price of 28. That's quite low, but it weighs nothing. So I'm gonna put it over here, simply because it's not two-handed and weighs nothing. These are two-handed and weigh something. Plastic fish. I love the plastic fish. He's so goofy looking. It's average price of 34 and 0 pounds. Because of the fact that it's 0 pounds, I have placed it here because it weighs literally nothing, and it has an average price of 34, can be up to 40. It's pretty good. Next, we have the player body. It always costs 5, and it weighs 11 pounds, and it's double-handed. The only instance in which you want this is for ridiculously clutch scenarios at the company building where you're missing 5. It's an F tier. It's kind of a silly entry, honestly. Yeah, that's a silly entry. Red soda. Red soda's really good. But the problem is that it has a really high variance. It can be worth as little as 18, but as much as 90, giving it an average price of 54, and it weighs 7 pounds. Because the average price is 54, sometimes it can be worth a lot, and it weighs nothing. I'm gonna put it here, but I definitely can't justify putting it above these though. I don't think so. Just because it has the chance to low roll so badly. But on average, it's going to be better than these items by a little bit. On average. And sometimes it can be much better. The remote. The remote is actually also a pretty good item. It has an average price of 34 and weighs nothing. It can be up to 48. So I think it's kind of just like a plastic fish, but better. A little bit better. So I think that's pretty reasonable. We put it right there. The robot toy might seem good, but in actuality, it has an average price of 72. That's pretty good. But it weighs 21 pounds. So it weighs as much as the lamp, but with a pretty significantly lower average price. Obviously, it's not two-handed, so that's a plus. But I can't really warrant putting it any better than like this. At the one hand, they're not two-handed. They're not okay. I'll put it above them, just because it's not two-handed. Rubber ducky. The rubber ducky is perhaps the funniest item in the entire game because it can be as bad as 2. You can find a rubber ducky worth 2, which is the lowest price in the whole game. But you can also find a rubber ducky worth 100, which means the average price is 51. Weighs 0 pounds. With that being said, it is kind of just a worse soda. Even though the average price of the duck is only 2 below the soda, the idea of being able to go as low as 2 is just not really gonna beat it out for me with the soda. So I'm gonna put it exactly where it is. The steering wheel. The steering wheel is kind of a bad item. It has an average price of 24 and weighs 16 pounds. Not very good. I'm gonna put it right here. The stop sign. Stop sign has an average price of 36 and weighs 21 pounds. So it's pretty good. It does weigh a lot, but the average price of 36 being up to all the way to 52 if you get lucky. And the fact that it has functionality, I think is going to place it above all of these items, but not above this, because this weighs nothing and has a pretty similar average price. Tattered metal sheet. I don't think this is going to be surprising to anybody, but this is the worst item in the game, by far. It weighs 26 pounds, has an average price of 16. That's really bad. There's no going around it. It's just quite bad. There's not even anything else for me to talk about. The tea kettle. Tea kettle is pretty decent. It weighs 21 pounds. It's quite cumbersome, but it has an average price of 44. It can be up to 52. That's pretty good, but because it weighs 21 pounds, I'm going to put it like here. I think that's reasonable because these are like almost half of the weight of this and similar average price. Well, it's like 10 less, but that's just a lot more weight. The teeth. The teeth are really good. The average price of the teeth is 72 and it weighs nothing. It has a variance of 60 through 84. So it's always going to be good, basically no matter what. So I think I can probably warrant putting it all the way up here. The main issue with the teeth is that they do make noise, but I've never died to that. So it's not really something I'm going to consider in the argument. It's definitely all the way up here. It's a very good item. Toothpaste. Toothpaste is, it weighs 0 pounds, has a pretty high variance, 14 through 48, with it giving it an average of 31. I'm going to put it right here. It's definitely just a worse version of the fish. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about putting the apparatus above or below, because it's much more cumbersome than the other items are. I think I'm going to keep it exactly where it is. The toy cube. The toy cube, statistically, is quite similar. All 4 of these items are very, very similar to each other, but it's a bit better than the toothpaste. Average price of 34. It's a little bit better. The V-type engine. It is the worst of these 3, of the trio of cheap double-handed items that are very common. It has an average price of 38 because the variance is quite high. Minimum of 20, maximum of 56. So it's the worst of these three. The whoopee cushion, not good. Put it in the F tier. It has an average price of 13. It can be single digit, but at the very least, it weighs 0 pounds. It does have that going for it, but no one really wants to find this item. It's not an item you want to see. The wedding ring. The wedding ring is pretty good. It has an average price of 66. It goes from 52 to 80, but it weighs 16 pounds. So that's kind of annoying. I think, honestly, because of how much it weighs, I don't know. Because it's on average, it's going to be pretty significantly better. Yeah, I'm gonna put it up here. Because the minimum price of the wedding ring is like the average for these two. Even though it weighs 16 pounds, I think that's reasonable. And finally, last but not least, we have the yield sign. Honestly, I think the yield sign and the tattered metal sheet are interchangeable for being the worst item in the game. The only reason why I give the yield sign the edge over the tattered metal sheet is because it technically has a functionality. It can be used as a weapon, technically, but that doesn't really give it much. It's still quite bad. It has an average price of 27, which you might be like, oh, that's pretty high, but it weighs 42 pounds. 42 pounds for an item with an average price of 27. That's really, really bad. I can't warrant this. I can't. It's quite bad. It's definitely, it belongs here. That's the end of this list. This is the full scrap tier list. There we go. That's the full scrap tier list.
So I thought it would be interesting to also cover the weather conditions. Obviously, there's not actually that much to talk about with these, but I still thought it was worth at least making a list for it. We're going to be ranking these based on how dangerous they realistically are and how much of an inconvenience it poses on a team. Starting with the rainy weather condition. Rainy is really not that big of a deal. If you're paying super close attention, you should be able to notice the quicksand patches, and even if you go into them, you can just like hold S so that you can walk out of it. The only time you should realistically die to the puddles on rainy is if you're just not paying any attention. It's pretty much always going to be your fault, in my opinion. So with that in mind, I think it should go like down here. And Stormy is pretty bad. It slows everything down. You have a rare chance to just die completely randomly. And honestly, I think it's probably the worst one, because at the very least on Eclipsed, you don't have a small chance of dying to complete dumb luck, because random lightning strikes can just happen to land on you wherever you are. That is not something that can happen in the Eclipsed weather condition, so I'm going to put Stormy in S tier. Speaking of Eclipsed, I think I'll go ahead and get that out of the way. Obviously, Eclipsed is quite bad. It spawns enemies inside and outside before you even land, and aside from that, it is basically the same as any other normal day, as far as I know. But it's not quite as bad as Stormy, in my opinion. I think for the most part, in a lot of circumstances, I would rather play Eclipsed. But this is only my opinion because I am pretty good at the game and I'm good at dealing with the monsters. So honestly, if you had to ask me realistically, I think Stormy and Eclipsed can be interchanged. Like, this is just as valid a ranking as this or even this. I don't really think it's a huge deal, but for me personally, I think Stormy is very inconvenient because it slows you down quite a bit and it has a chance to kill you randomly, which Eclipsed does not. Now we have Foggy, which is like, honestly, I'm going to move Rainy up to C and Foggy to D, because Foggy just literally cannot kill you. As long as you have memorized the map, you can't really die to this. So I'm just going to keep it down there. Flooded is, I would say, could pretty comfortably be in B tier. It's mostly an inconvenience. Actually, I'll switch them. No, this feels so weird. I think I just have to leave that tier empty. Because it's not a B tier level of inconvenience or a threat. So it's definitely like here. Because Flooded is definitely way slower and you have to leave faster than you would on Rainy on most moons. But it's probably not going to kill you.
if you know what you're doing. But is it more dangerous than Rainy, though? I think I might just be yapping. Rainy is so much easier to prevent. Yeah, that's way more inconvenient. But it's not like a B tier level of inconvenience, in my opinion. I wouldn't say so. And obviously, normal weather is clear. It's F tier because it basically doesn't do anything aside from just let you play the game normally. I think I'm pretty satisfied with that. I could honestly warrant putting Flooded up here, but I have only ever died to Flooded once, and I've died to Rainy more times than that. So I think that's where I'm gonna be at with this one. This was a short one, but I still think it was interesting. Now we're at the moons. This, in my opinion, is probably the most interesting ranking. I really like talking about all of the details and nuance regarding the balancing of the moons in this game. It's probably a lot more cut and dry than a lot of you think. We're gonna go ahead and talk about them in the order that they appear in the game. We've talked about the power level. We've talked about max spawns. Those are gonna be very important in our considerations for ranking the moons. We've talked about the scrap as well, which is also going to be important. There's a reason why I ordered this in the way that it is. There's another thing, the enemy spawn curves and like the turret and mine counts. A lot of the wiki information does not really have on hand how many mines and turrets can be on given moons. It seems to be a newer thing that people are doing. So I'm only going to be talking about that for the 3 hard moons, just so you know. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about experimentation, the first moon in the game. The enemies are generally pretty safe. Enemies don't spawn very much or very often, and not for a while. The outside layout is very simple, and it is tied with assurance for having the smallest map. The indoor size multiplier is 1. It's the noob map. Everybody knows it's the noob map. But that's exactly the problem with experimentation. To account for its simplicity, it has an average scrap count of 9.5. So on average, you're going to find 10 items total on the whole moon. And the quality of those items is quite bad. The indoor power level is 4. And the most common enemy is the spider. If you remember what we talked about earlier, the spider has a power level of 3, which means most of the time you're only going to have like 2 or 3 enemies on the whole map. That's probably going to be spiders, snare fleas, and hoarding bugs. The outside power level is 8. The only 2 things that can spawn are dogs and worms, which both have a power level of 2. You're not really going to be seeing any of them until pretty late in the night. Bees can also spawn pretty rarely, but yeah, overall, this moon is just not very good. I went ahead and calculated a weighted average price and weight for all of the scrap on every moon. Let's take a look at the average price and weight of the scrap. Experimentation has an average scrap price of 30.7, and the average weight is 17. Now, currently, we don't have any basis to understand how bad that is, but you'll figure it out quite quickly when we talk about assurance. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say it after all this discussion. F tier. It's bad. It's not good. You don't want to go there, like, ever. It's a waste of your time. It's not worth it, I promise. If you are just starting off in the game, you can obviously do whatever you want. If you're brand new to the game, you probably shouldn't be listening to a word that I'm saying in this video anyways. I'm being honest. You should just play the game and do whatever you want. But that being said, moving on to assurance. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Assurance is without a doubt the best unpaid moon in the entire game. It's not even close. Despite having similar power levels inside and out to experimentation, including the same map size, the quality and quantity of the loot has skyrocketed dramatically. You may remember before I said the average price and weight was 30.7 and 17. On Assurance, it's 37.7 and 15.8. So that is a massive, massive increase. There's also a lot more scrap. The average amount of scrap is 14.5, so like 15 instead of 10. So it's way better. There's way more loot on the same space indoors, same amount of space with way more loot, and the loot is much better. There's 2 things that mainly elevate Assurance over the other maps. It has a pretty decent chance for bees, which is unlike experimentation. Vow and March are a little bit better in terms of bees, but it's still a pretty good benefit. when combined with all of the other things. The main thing that I really want to talk about, basically as soon as a ship door opens, you go to the left and you walk off of the edge of the ship onto the rock, and you can go over to the fire exit. You can get in reasonably within 11, 12, 13 seconds. It's insane. It's insanely good. The main entrance has a similar shortcut. It's not nearly as effective, but you can cut down maybe like 10 seconds of the travel time. Assurance, overall, Assurance is just, it's really, really, really good. It is easy S tier. It's so good. And I don't even think people realize how good it is. If you play Lethal Company, you need to start going to Assurance. Moving on to Vow. Vow's not great. It has actually less loot than Assurance on a slightly bigger map, meaning the density of the loot is a little bit worse in both ways compared to Assurance. The trek from the ship is also pretty slow, and even slower if the bridge breaks. It has a pretty significantly higher chance to spawn bees than Assurance, but I personally don't think that makes up for the other disadvantages. That being the enemies you have to deal with. Vow has a 65% chance to spawn giants, and that's really annoying. On top of that, inside, the Bracken has a 26% chance to spawn. The power level inside is 7 and outside is 6, so most likely you're going to get 2 giant spawns, filling up that 6 power level. And inside you'll have a Bracken along with maybe 2 or 3 other things. That's really not pleasant. You might also deal with some baboon hawks outside, which, as you know, are kind of negligible threats. They have a pretty high chance of spawning, but the loot quality and it's just not great. The average price of loot is 37.6, so it's actually very, very, very slightly worse than Assurance. But obviously the density of the loot is pretty significantly worse because the amount of scrap on average is 11 as opposed to 14.5 or 15. And the average weight of the loot is 15.3, slightly better than Assurance. It's really not worth it though, because the trek back to the ship is so much longer than on the other maps. It does have one main benefit, the bees and the fire exit. The fire exit is pretty close to the main entrance. It's easily accessible. You can have your team of 4 people. You can have people split off quite easily from the fire exit and the main entrance. So that's one benefit. But other than that, it's not very good. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in C tier. Okay, moving on to offense. I don't like offense. This is going from bad to worse. It has a slightly higher loot count compared to Assurance. It's a 16 instead of 15 on average. But the power level has gone up to 12 indoors and 8 outdoors. The map size multiplier is 1.25 instead of 1, which means the loot density in offense and Assurance is most likely very similar, if not the same or worse. The cherry on top with all of that, the average price and weight of loot on offense is worse than Assurance. It's also worse than Vow, and that is not even considering everything else that's bad about it. The Thumper has a 26% chance to spawn. You don't really need me to tell you why that's annoying. They're pretty obnoxious. You're basically forced to bring a shovel with you into offense, otherwise you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. The big red flag about offense, the coil head on a free moon has a nearly 12% chance of spawning. That's pretty bad. That means more than 1 out of 10 times you are going to have to deal with a coil head on a moon where the loot is not even better than Assurance, which is way safer. There's also a higher chance of giants spawning outside compared to Assurance. It's 4.5%. That's pretty... It's not going to happen very often. It's still relatively rare. You're mainly going to be dealing with dogs outside, but that's still... It's just not worth it. The one saving grace of offense is the fire exit pipe jump that you can do at the beginning. But the problem is that if you leave this pipe, this top area with the fire exit, if you jump off, you need an extension ladder to get back up, which is a huge disadvantage. It's also very far from the main entrance. You can technically do a really annoying boulder parkour setup to get back up, but it takes a really long time. You're just going to be wasting time. Yeah, offense is not good. I promise it's not good. I didn't have very much experience with offense before making this ranking. I played on it for a few hours exclusively, and my opinion was solidified. I don't like it very much. So I'm going to very easily put it in D tier. I'm satisfied with that. Moving on, we have March. I think March is kind of overrated, but it's still really good. Does that make sense? I like it, but it's definitely overrated. Some people think it's better than Assurance. I don't agree at all. The power level on March is quite high. It's 14 inside and 12 outside, which means you can have a lot of giants outside. And a lot of thumpers and brackens are both pretty common. The loot count on March inside is actually identical to Assurance, and that is not great considering the map size multiplier is 2. So it's the same amount of loot as Assurance, but over an area twice as large. The way that the game tries to account for that is by giving you 2 extra fire exits behind the ship to the left and right. This is cool. It's the only map that has 3 fire exits. The problem is that a lot of the time they end up being really close to each other, and then it doesn't even matter. So that's pretty bad. The average price and weight of loot on March is 37.7 credits and 16.1 pounds. That is very, 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 very close to Assurance on a map that's twice as big. The main reason why you're coming here is because of the bees. March has the highest chance to spawn bees, and there can be quite a few of them. But I have issues with this as well. A lot of the times the bees end up being super far, or they just don't spawn. It's pretty reasonable to have a day on March with no bees, and if bees don't spawn on March, there's no point in going there over Assurance at all. Not even a little bit. It's just not worth it. So yeah, March is a pretty hit or miss map if it doesn't go well, which is the reason why I don't think it's quite as good as people say it is. However, it is still, on average, pretty good. The bees, if you get bees, more than 1 or 2, or maybe even 3, then you're going to be making a buttload of money. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in A tier, despite all of the things that I said. I do like March, I promise. Moving on, we have the last 3, the tier 3 paid moons. Starting with Rend. Rend is the best map in the game. It's not even close. S tier, above Assurance, because it's a tier 3 moon, so that kind of just makes sense. It has a power level indoors 10. That's pretty low. Outside is only 6. I don't really know why the power levels are so low. The map size multiplier is 1.2, which might seem small, but you're mainly going to be dealing with the mansion layout. And the mansion layout, it scales very differently. The map size multiplier should not be considered in the same way. The amount of scrap, on average, you're going to be having 22 pieces of scrap on Rend, which is a massive upgrade from the figures that we were previously discussing. Speaking of, we have the average price of scrap, 59 credits, average weight 14.3, massive improvements across the board from the other moons. The most common enemies on this map are the Nutcracker, the Jester, and the Bracken. The Jester and Bracken have a power level of 3, the Nutcracker is 1. Again, many of them can spawn. So the power level of 10 is a bit misleading, because a lot of the enemies, like the Coilheads and the Nutcrackers, have only 1 power. So I think that's the reason why it's so low. But if a Bracken or a Spider spawns, that's going to be like 3 out of the 10. It's quite a bit. The Nutcracker being the highest spawn chance is 26%. That's kind of a good thing though, because you can farm shotguns. If you kill one of them with a shovel, it's hard, but it's not too hard. Then you can farm shotguns, you can sell them, you can use them to kill other enemies, like the Bracken, the 3rd most common enemy. Outside, you're going to be dealing with a max of like 3 enemies, dogs and giants, sometimes worms. It's pretty rare. The main advantage of Rend, though, the reason why Rend is so good, is because of the complete and utter lack of turrets. Rend has no turrets at all, and almost no landmines. I think the amount of landmines total is 0 through 3. The main entrance and the fire exit are pretty easy to access as well. Earlier in the game's existence, Rend's fire exit was infamous for being quite easy to get lost in. And this is just a problem of not really knowing what you're doing. If you learn where the fire exit is, if you learn how to get there and you learn how to get back, it's not bad. Which leads me into Dine. Dine is kind of just Rend, but worse. The average price of loot is a little bit worse. The average weight is a little bit better, but the map is larger. going from 1.2 to 1.3, and there's only 2 more pieces of scrap on average. The power level has shot up to 15 from 10. That's hard. I think this placement is going to be a harsh reality check for some of you watching because you probably like Dine because it's safer than Titan, which is true. First of all, before you even consider anything else, you have to have an extra 150 credits to even get to Dine in the first place. That's not a super big issue. I will give you one thing. The fire exit at Dine is significantly better. It's faster. It's easier. Extension ladder is not even necessary. You can kind of shimmy up there with a certain setup. The weather conditions are also a little bit better than Rend because it replaces Stormy with Flooded, and Flooded is pretty trivial on Dine. You can reasonably travel between the main and ship until like 3 or 4 because of the shortcut to the left of the lamp path. And the fire exit is basically safe for the whole day on Flooded, so yeah, it's a non-issue. The most common enemies are the Jester, Spider, and Nutcracker. The Spider's kind of nice because it takes up 3 power level basically for free, but the Jester being the most common thing is obviously pretty bad. You don't really want that to happen. That's pretty bad. Outside, the giant spawns are down pretty significantly from Ren's. That's another advantage. It's at 17% now, so it's mainly going to be dogs and worms. So far, during this discussion, you might be a little bit confused because I've been mostly describing Rend and Dine as having pretty standard, like, benefits and disadvantages relative to each other. It seems pretty normal. So why is Dine so much worse? And that's because of the turret and mine hell. Unlike Ren's 0 through 3 count of mines total, Dine has a count of 5 through 35. It goes up to 35, and the turrets sit at 1 up to 18. These numbers are a little bit misleading. I won't try to skew that because the actual final count of what gets placed on the map is determined by a curve, similar to the enemies. So it's not linear. It's not like it has a random chance. It might be 1, it might be 15, it might be 18. It's more likely to be lower than it is higher, but it's still on average going to be much, much worse than Rend. I really don't think I need to elaborate. The numbers are just much worse than Rend in terms of turrets and mines, and the power level inside is 15. So if you personally feel like dealing with 50% more enemies along with mines and turrets on a moon that has pretty much the same quality and quantity of loot, then be my guest. But I have no interest in it. We're putting Dine in B tier. Finally, we have Titan. Titan is really, 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 really weird. I won't lie to you. I'm a Titan enjoyer. I'm biased because I'm a solo speedrunner, but I like playing on Titan. Hear me out. The average loot count on Titan is 30. It's 30. That's 7 more than Dine and 9 more than Rend. But the map size multiplier is 2.35, which is not quite as bad as it sounds. I said before that the scaling of the map size multiplier is different because Titan is primarily a factory type interior about 80% of the time. The other 20% of the time, it ends up being a mansion, and that is actually quite bad. Before the nerf to Titan, the loot was much higher, and it being a mansion did not really matter. But the map size multiplier of 2.35 does not seem to scale. I would appreciate if Zeekers fixed this because Mansion Titan is kind of unplayable. I won't lie to you. The main benefit of Titan, though, is that the outside area is really simple and really fast compared to every moon in the game. Main and fire exit are right next to each other. If you get lucky, they can be on 2 entirely different halves of a giant map with lots of loot. And once you're done, you can just drop everything down and then use the extension ladder to put the items right on the ship, which makes it so that the giants and dogs you might have to deal with are a bit more of a negligible threat. The problem is that you have to leave pretty quickly. You have to be leaving Titan at like 2-3 p.m. because the map is very dangerous. If you're not mentally prepared to get absolutely screwed, sometimes you should not go to Titan. The outside power level is 7. It's a bit higher than Dine and Ren's 6, which typically will mean an extra 4th enemy compared to those 2 moons. And the inside power level is 18. It's 8 more than Rend and 3 more than Dine. it's pretty rough. The most common enemies are going to be the jesters, nutcrackers, brackens, spiders, and coilheads, which are all about 12.5 to 10.5%. Most of these are pretty big problems. The spider is kind of negligible, the nutcracker is manageable, but the jester, the bracken, and the coilhead are very annoying. If you have a shotgun with you, you can deal with 3 out of these 5 most common enemies seamlessly, but the jesters and coilheads are not to be underestimated. And the map is huge, so you're probably not going to find all of the loot. You might get lost in the maze, and to add insult to injury, it has a really high turret and mine count. It's almost as bad as Dying in that regard. It is basically the definition of high risk, high reward. The thing that's really nice about Titan is that the loot on factory types is super concentrated. So you're looking for these loot rooms. These loot rooms can have hundreds of credits worth of items, and they can spawn really close to the entrances. That is basically what you're relying on. But if it doesn't happen, then your experience will be very rough. That being said, I still would prefer to go to Titan over Dying. This is personal preference, honestly. This is not objective. I honestly think that these can be swapped. Like, this is fine. I just personally prefer playing on Titan. And I also wanted to make sure every tier had at least one thing. So yeah, that's going to be it for the moon tier list. This is my final list for the moons. All right, moving on to the equipment tier list. This one's pretty interesting, honestly. I'm going to be ranking these items based on their cost and how important they are to actually improving the overall gameplay experience. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Boombox. It is only really practical to use against dogs. In my opinion, instead of buying a boombox, which is worth like 60, I believe, it's much more cost effective to just buy a walkie from the dropship, because the dropship music will distract all of the dogs for quite a long time. The problem with that option is that it takes a while. So that is, you know, there's benefits and disadvantages to it, but it's just not very good. So I'll put it in C tier. The extension ladder. The extension ladders are exceptionally good on Titan. It is so nice, but they're kind of not really good for anything else. I mean, technically you can use them on offense for the fire exit and on Dying for the fire exit, but you don't want to go to offense, first of all. And on Dying, the extension ladder is not actually necessary at all to get up, as I also showed. So I'll put it in B tier. It's nice, but it's not insane. It's not an insane thing. The flashlight. This item sucks. Don't ever buy this. Don't ever buy this. I'm kind of biased because I play without a flashlight, but I just don't think that anyone should be buying this item. It's just not good. Don't buy it. Moving on to the jetpack. The jetpack is pretty good. It's a pretty good item, but only if you're trying to take the game super seriously, if you're trying to really improve your efficiency as a team or as an individual person, because its cost is tremendously high. It's 700, so you either have to get it on sale or wait a really long time. It also weighs a lot, and you can't transport double-handed items with it. So if you're using it on hard moons, you're going to have to say goodbye to paintings and fancy lamps. Not on Titan, but on Rend and Dying. You just have to fork over 700 credits and learn how to master the scuffed controls. But when you do know how to use it, it's a very valuable asset to the company. So I'll put it in A tier. Very good. Have you ever used the lockpicker? Be honest. Have you ever used it? I had never seen anyone using this until like a week ago. And I understand why they used it, because they were going for high quota world record, so they're trying to clear the map. It's cheap, I guess, but it weighs a decent bit, takes up an inventory slot, and it takes 30 seconds to open a door. So really, it's only good if you're like a mega tryhard trying to clear a whole map as thoroughly as possible. It is more practical of a purchase than the boombox is. Moving on, Pro Flashlight. This is one of the few items that I think is actually worth having in your inventory. It's more useful on mansions as well. Mansions are darker and the rooms are bigger, so it's really nice on mansions compared to factory. But I'm gonna go ahead and put this in A tier. It's definitely better than the jetpack. It's quite nice, quite a nice item. Now we have the radar booster. I have really interesting opinions about the radar booster. It is definitely a highly underrated item, but I still don't really vibe with using it personally that much. If you have a terminal person that spams the command to flash the booster, it's really nice. You can use it on giants. You can use it to stall the jester.
if someone bothers to bring it with them. But that's the problem. The person has to bother bringing it with them all the way into the facility, and then they have to take it back because it's kind of expensive. If you have a lot of money, then you can buy them expendably, and then it definitely makes more sense. I'll put it up here. It's a good item, but I have some mixed opinions. That's all I'm going to say, really. Moving on, the shovel. The shovel is a very, very good item. It's cheap, it's light, and it's a versatile weapon. You can use it to defend yourself from most threats in the game. That will be an actual issue, like thumpers, like snare fleas, like spiders, like nutcrackers, even brackens if you're feeling a bit devious. I'm putting it in S tier. It's just good. I don't know what else I can say. It's good. The spray paint. I don't really like it. It's not that good. I wish it was better. I like the idea, but it's kind of expensive and it takes up an inventory slot. And it doesn't really offer that much practical use of like marking off an area. I think instead of doing that, you can just like place an item on the floor as like a beacon. The main thing to help yourself not get lost, it's not overextending yourself and just being good at the game, having good spatial awareness. So I'm going to put it in D tier. If you want to be funny, then it's like an S tier item. That's not what we're talking about here. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to stick it down in D tier. Stun grenade. Stun grenade is really good. Very underrated item. It's like a more convenient version of the radar booster because it's much lighter than the radar booster and it does not require a terminal person to be used. That's the main thing. Its main purpose is to negate giant attacks. If you get picked up, you can use it and it'll get stunned for 8 seconds, which is huge. That is a huge advantage. So I'm going to put it at the bottom of S tier. I think it's very good. TZP Inhalant. This is not a good item. I'm sorry. It's so expensive. It costs 120 credits. You basically can't see at all. It's an overlay that covers your whole screen. While yes, you do get to sprint for longer, it's kind of like the lockpicker in that it can be good, but most of the time it's not worth acquiring. So I think I'm going to put it here. It's definitely better than the spray paint, but it's not. It's more of a funny haha item right now. That's why I'm putting it all the way down here. It's just not that good in my opinion. Next we have the walkie-talkie. I think the walkie-talkie is the single most underrated item in the entire game. The battery lasts more than a day. Being able to talk to your teammates and to your terminal dude is an immeasurable advantage. I don't think people realize just how good this item actually is. In my opinion, because I don't play with a flashlight, if I had to pick between bringing a flashlight in and bringing a walkie in, I would bring a walkie. Communication is more important than being able to see a little bit better. It's so much better. So yeah, easy S tier. The zap gun. This item fucking sucks. I'm sorry. It's such a bad item. Why would you spend $400? It's like, it had its use before the shotgun was added, but now that the shotgun's in the game, it makes no sense. You can pretty much deal with anything with a shovel if you're good at the game without having to stun it with the zap gun. Or you can just use a stun grenade instead, which is much cheaper. Much cheaper than the zap gun. Not worth it. That's an F tier item. It's too expensive. It's just not, it's not good. Not good at all. So moving on, we're going to do the ship upgrades and then we're going to do the last two kind of miscellaneous ones, these two. So the teleporter. This is not even a debate. It is easy high S tier. The ability to save your teammates from dying in clutch situations or to recover their bodies. There's just so much you can do. It's an indescribably valuable asset. You need to buy this ship upgrade as soon as possible. Absolutely as soon as possible. The inverse teleporter is not quite as good as the regular teleporter. I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, it's generally going to be the fastest way that you can enter the building, like for sure. Because even though the jetpack will get you into the main or fire exit faster than an inverse teleporter, most likely, this one has a chance of getting you super deep into the map, which means you can start looting areas that you may not have been able to get to quite as easily otherwise. And that's exactly the problem with the inverse teleporter. You can get lost or you can get stuck behind a locked door. You can obviously counter getting stuck by just having the terminal person watch you. Like if you have a terminal person sit and look at everyone using the inverse for like 30 seconds, and then if you don't even have to stay on the terminal, just watch for like 30 seconds, and then you're like, all right, everyone's good, no one's stuck, I'll be the one to go in the building last. That's a perfectly valid strategy. So yeah, it's definitely better on the smaller maps too, because you're less likely to get lost. But the problem is that you won't have the money when you're on the smaller maps, most likely. You're probably going to be on Rend or Dine or Titan already. So I'm going to put it in B tier, upper B tier. It's more practical, definitely, than the extension ladder, but it's definitely not better than the radar booster. I think it's very comfortable right here. The loud horn, man. The loud horn is not a very good item. It's kind of like a signal translator, but it's worse, because it can't really give specific instructions unless you like arbitrarily decide what something means with your team. But why do that? You can use it to attract dogs to the other side of the ship. Guess it's kind of like a worse boombox, honestly, is its only good use. It should be down here. But it's a ship upgrade, so you're not going to lose it. You're not going to lose it like the boombox, and it's not that much more expensive than the boombox. So yeah, it's going to be a C tier, mid C tier. Speaking of the signal translator, in my opinion, this is the best piece of equipment in the entire game. The ability to send specific 9-character messages to everyone on the map without having to take up an inventory slot is insanely valuable. Information in this game is crucial. The reason why it's above the walkie-talkie is because no one has to hold it, but someone does have to be at the ship. You should probably have someone on the terminal no matter what if you're playing with 4 players. You don't have to, but it's definitely a good idea. I really don't think I need to justify any further. This is just, it's really good. I'm going to go ahead and put it at the top of S tier. When I play the game, what do I buy in terms of ship upgrades? I always try to buy the teleporter and the signal translator as soon as possible, because it just makes your gameplay experience so much safer and more efficient. So got 2 more miscellaneous items after this. Keys are pretty nice. They have multiple uses. You can use them as lightning rods, which is quite valuable to get rid of random lightning during Stormy. You can pick them up too. You don't have to leave them behind. Or you can, use them for their intended purpose and take them with you to open doors. It's nice to stockpile them. I think it's a great idea. It's not better than the extension ladder, I wouldn't say, because it's, at the end of the day, they're one-time use items. But if you stockpile them, they're quite good. So I think that's a pretty reasonable placement. Finally, we have the shotgun, the double-barrel shotgun. The placement of this is a no-brainer. It's better than the shovel, but it's harder to acquire. It's not the easiest to acquire in the world. And it only weighs twice what the shovel does. And it makes killing nutcrackers basically free, so you can farm them to get more ammo and to sell the extra shotguns. So I will say it's definitely not quite as good as the teleporter and the signal translator, but these 3 items are essential to making your gameplay experience safer and more consistent. These are the 3 best equipment items in the game for sure. I don't think that is up for any debate, honestly. It's just a really good item. That's it. That is the end of the equipment tier list. All right, so this is a little bonus. I did say that I would be ranking literally everything in Lethal Company. So I thought that doing the cosmetics would also be very funny. Obviously, this one is completely subjective, except for the cozy lights, because they kind of help you when the power goes out. I'm gonna put that in S tier just because they kind of have actual practical use. Jack-o'-lantern kind of does the same thing. I think Jack-o'-lantern is really goofy. I like him. I'm gonna put so many things too high up. Look at this guy. I fucking love that guy. Look at him. Let's continue. The goldfish. What a great guy. I love the goldfish. The table. It's literally just a table. Why the fuck? F tier. It's a table, bro. Who cares? Romantic table. Cool. It's cool. Record player. I like music. Toilet. Nah. Like, why would I want a toilet, bro? It's a toilet. That's messed up. I don't want a toilet in my ship. Nah. Shower. Nah, it's kind of big. Takes up a lot of space. B tier. Welcome mat. C. I don't really care for it. All right, the TV. I think the TV is pretty cool. I like it more than these things. I'll move them like this. TV is cool. Now let's rank the suits. I like the color purple. It's cool. It's for the challenge moons. The green one's kind of ugly. It's not toilet ugly though. The default suit, it's okay. It's a suit. The yellow one's kind of cool, but I don't really vibe with it. So I'm gonna put it like here. I don't vibe with it very much. The pajama suit is awesome. Like, why would I not want to wear pajamas? Like, these guys are like, they're brothers, so they get to be very close to each other. Yeah, that's my little silly cosmetic ranking. Don't take it very seriously. I kind of just did this for fun. And that's going to be it. That's the last list. Hold on. So I know that I said I was done. I'm doing this like a few minutes after I finished recording. I just realized something very important. I need to make a new tier, a new one. This is a very, very important. S plus plus plus, S in infinite plus times infinity. This guy, look at him. Come on. That's S, however many pluses this is. He deserves it. And there we have it. I've ranked literally everything in Lethal Company. Let me know if you enjoyed the more casual, less scripted approach that this video has. I like over-explaining my interests, and it seems like I've ended up taking like an hour of your time doing that, so hopefully my yapping wasn't too obnoxious. Finally, it would mean the world if you subscribed to more content like this and turned on post notifications so you never miss a video. If you want to support me further, $5 members get early access to videos, and you can also follow my socials and join the Discord server. That being said, that's gonna be all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time.